Young Hanul Lee stood at the transport bay window of Station Centauri, her heart beating fast as she watched the stars glitter against the dark canvas of space. At 18, she had become the youngest human ever chosen for the interstellar exchange program. The massive station hung like a silver flower in space, its petals slowly rotating to create artificial gravity. She pressed her hand against the cool glass, remembering the day she'd received her acceptance letter. Her parents had cried with joy, knowing their daughter would be one of the few humans to live among the Aetherians, a species that had made contact with Earth just 5 years ago. The transport ship docked smoothly, and Haniel gathered her few belongings. As the airlock cycled, she checked her translator implant one last time. It sat snugly behind her ear, ready to convert the musical language of the Aetherians into English. When the doors opened, Hanul's breath caught in her throat. The Aetherians were even more beautiful than the videos had shown. Tall, graceful beings with iridescent skin that caught the light and scattered it like living prisms. They moved through the air as if gravity was merely a suggestion, their anti-gravity organs allowing them to float and glide with elegant ease. A small group of station officials waited to greet her. They hovered at different heights, their long robes floating around them like clouds. "Welcome to Station Centauri," they said in their singing voices, the translator converting their words smoothly. As Hanul followed them through the station's main corridor, something caught her eye. Among the floating forms, a small figure moved differently. An Aetherian child, no more than the equivalent of 10 Earth years old, was pulling himself across the polished floor using his upper limbs. The boy's skin shimmered with blues and greens as he moved, but unlike the others who drifted effortlessly above the ground, he remained firmly on the floor. Other Aetherians simply floated past him, some moving their robes aside as if to avoid contact. Aniel slowed her pace, watching as the child reached out with long, delicate fingers to grip the floor's texture strips, designed to help maintain traction in artificial gravity. His movements were practiced but clearly tiring. A small bag was strapped to his back, and he stopped occasionally to rest, his chest moving rapidly with exertion. The station officials noticed her attention had wandered. "Please, keep moving," one said. "We have much to show you about your living quarters." But Hanul couldn't look away. The contrast between the floating Aetherians and this ground-bound child struck her deeply. "What's wrong with him?" she asked, then immediately worried the question might seem rude. The officials exchanged glances. "The child has a defective gravity organ," one explained, their voice carrying the note of what seemed like embarrassment. "It happens sometimes. Nothing can be done." Hanul watched as an adult Aetherian, possibly a parent, floated down to the boy and spoke quietly to him. The child nodded and continued his slow progress along the corridor. No offer of help was made. "But surely there's some way to help him move around more easily," Hanul asked, thinking of the many mobility solutions humans had developed over centuries. "It is not our way," another official said firmly. "Those who cannot rise must find their own path. Now, about your quarters." As they led her away, Hanul looked back one last time. The boy had reached a junction in the corridor and was turning toward what looked like an education center. His movements were determined, despite his obvious fatigue. In that moment, Hanul made a decision. She might be here to learn about Aetherian culture, but perhaps she could also share something from Earth, something about how humans had learned to help those who moved differently. She thought of her cousin back home, who used a wheelchair and lived a full, active life. The Aetherians had mastered space travel and anti-gravity technology, but sometimes the simplest solutions were the ones they couldn't see. As she followed the officials to her new quarters, Hanul's mind was already working on a plan. She was only one human on a station of thousands of Aetherians, but maybe that was enough. Sometimes the biggest changes started with the smallest acts of kindness. The stars continued their eternal dance outside the station windows, witnesses to this moment when a young human girl decided to bridge not just the gap between species, but between different ways of moving through the world. Her exchange year was about to become much more than she'd ever imagined. Over the next few days, Hanyul kept seeing the young Aetherian boy in the same corridors. She learned his schedule. He would drag himself to the education center each morning, rest in the garden area during break times, and make his way home in the late afternoon. His determination touched her heart. One day, while Hanyul sat in the garden area working on her cultural studies, she noticed the boy taking his usual rest near a cluster of Earth-imported flowers. Gathering her courage, she walked over and sat down near him, but not too close. "Hello," she said softly, her translator converting her words into the musical Aetherian language. The boy looked up, his iridescent skin shifting to gentle shades of blue, a sign of surprise in his species. "Hello, Earth human," he replied, his voice carrying the melodic tones of his people. "I am Doi." The translator told her that his name meant morning light, in their language, a beautiful name that seemed to match the way his skin caught and scattered the station's artificial lighting. They talked quietly, their conversation halting at first, but growing more comfortable as minutes passed. Doi was curious about Earth and how humans moved without hovering abilities. Hanyul explained about walking, running, and the many ways humans had learned to move. "But what happens when humans can't walk?" Doi asked, his skin rippling with colors that suggested deep interest. Hanyul smiled and told him about wheelchairs, prosthetics, and other mobility aids. Doi's eyes grew wide. Their species had never considered such solutions because they had never needed them. Their entire civilization was built around the ability to hover. As they talked more, Doi introduced Hanyul to his parents, Tahoe and Minji, who had come to collect him. They hovered nearby, their skin showing patterns of concern and curiosity. Through careful conversation, Hanyul learned the full story. Doi had been born with a non-functioning gravity organ, a rare condition among their species. His parents had tried everything their advanced medical science could offer: organ stimulation, genetic therapy, even experimental treatments from other alien species. Nothing had worked. "Our people believe that those who cannot rise must accept their fate," Minji explained, her skin showing waves of sadness. "It is seen as the will of the universe." Tahoe added, "We have done what we can for our son. He is strong, he adapts." But Hanyul could see the pain in his color patterns as he watched Doi struggle to move across the floor. The more they talked, the more Hanyul understood the deep cultural differences at play. The Aetherians were an advanced civilization that had mastered space travel and anti-gravity technology, but their solutions always involved rising above the ground. The idea of embracing ground-based movement was foreign to them. Their architecture reflected this. There were no stairs, no ramps, just open spaces where Aetherians floated freely between levels. Even their furniture was designed to hover at adjustable heights. The texture strips on the floor that Doi used to pull himself along were only there to help during rare gravity system maintenance. "Have you ever thought about creating tools to help Doi move more easily on the ground?" Hanyul asked carefully. The parent's skin flickered with patterns he hadn't seen before. "Move, on the ground, intentionally." Tahoe seemed to struggle with the concept. "On Earth, we believe in adapting our environment to help everyone participate fully in life," Hanyul explained. "We don't see it as accepting fate, but as creating new possibilities." She watched as Doi's skin shifted to bright, hopeful colors. His parents exchanged looks, their own skin patterns swirling with complex emotions. The translator couldn't quite capture the subtle meanings of their color changes, but Hanyul sensed she had given them something new to consider. As the family prepared to leave, Doi turned to Hanyul. "Will you tell me more about Earthways?" he asked, his colors bright with hope. "I would like that very much," Hanyul replied, watching as his parents carefully helped him gather his things. As they left, she noticed other Aetherians in the garden watching with interest. Perhaps they too were beginning to see that there could be more than one way to move through the world. That night, in her quarters, Hanyul wrote a long message to her family back on Earth. She had an idea, but she would need their help. As she looked out at the stars, She thought about how understanding sometimes meant looking past the obvious to see new possibilities. Sometimes the greatest barriers weren't physical at all, but the ones built by assumptions and traditions. The idea came to Hanyul late one night as she watched old videos from home. There was her cousin Dongha, racing through the park in his wheelchair, laughing as he performed tricks and spins. Dongha had outgrown that particular chair years ago, but the family had kept it, unable to part with something that had brought such joy and freedom. Early the next morning, Hanyul sent an urgent message to her parents. She explained about Doi and her idea, attaching images she had taken of Aetherian body structure from the station's public database. Her father replied within hours. They still had Dongha's old wheelchair in storage, and he would arrange to send it on the next supply ship. While waiting for the wheelchair to arrive, Hanyul spent more time with Doi. They would meet in the station's garden area, where he told her about his dreams. His skin would shimmer with bright colors as he described wanting to explore the upper levels of the station, places where the most beautiful plants grew and where other children played. Sometimes I watch them from below, Doi said one day, his colors shifting to deeper blues. They play floating games, moving through obstacle courses and racing between levels. I pretend I'm up there too. Hanyul kept her plans secret, not wanting to raise hopes until she was sure it would work. But she did tell Doi stories about Earth and how humans had learned to move in many different ways. His fascination grew with each tale. Your people are very creative, he said, his skin rippling with interested patterns. You don't just accept things as they are. Doi's parents, Tahoe and Minji, often watched these conversations from a distance, hovering uncertainly. Their skin patterns showed a mix of hope and worry. One day, Minji approached Hanyul after Doi had gone home. Why do you spend so much time with our son? She asked, her translator conveying genuine confusion. In our culture, those with limitations are treated with respect, but we do not interfere. Hanyul chose her words carefully. On Earth, we believe that limitations only define us if we let them. We look for ways to overcome challenges, to help everyone participate fully in life. Minji's skin swirled with complex patterns. But isn't it cruel to give hope where there might be none? Hope itself has value, Hanyul replied. It drives us to look for solutions we might otherwise miss. The days passed slowly as Hanyul waited for the supply ship. She used the time to learn more about Aetherian physiology and to make friends with the station's engineers. She would need their help to modify the wheelchair for Doi's unique body structure. She also noticed small changes in how others treated Doi. The regular sight of him talking and laughing with a human seemed to make some Aetherians reconsider their attitudes. A few children even started stopping to talk with him, their natural curiosity overcoming cultural barriers. One particularly meaningful moment came when Doi's teacher contacted Hanyul. The teacher explained that Doi's participation in class had increased since their friendship began. He was asking more questions, showing more confidence. Finally, after what felt like ages, the station's cargo master informed Hanyul that a package had arrived from Earth. Her hands trembled as she opened the crate. There it was, Dongha's old wheelchair, still sturdy despite its years of use. Along with it came a note from her cousin. I hope it brings as much freedom to your friend as it brought to me. Hanyul contacted Doi's parents that evening, asking permission to show them something from Earth. When they arrived at her quarters, their skin patterns showed surprise at the sight of the wheelchair. This is how many humans who can't walk move around, Hanyul explained, demonstrating how the wheels worked. With some modifications, it could help Doi move more easily. Tahoe and Minji stared at the device, their colors shifting rapidly. But it stays on the ground, Tahoe said, as if this was hard to comprehend. Yes, Hanyul replied, but it allows freedom of movement, independence. Doi wouldn't have to use so much energy just to get around. She watched as the parents communicated in their own way, their skin patterns interacting in complex dances of color. Finally, Minji spoke. Our way has always been to accept what cannot be changed, she said slowly. But perhaps we have been looking at this wrong. Perhaps change is possible, just not in the way we expected. It was a small step, but an important one. As Hanuel began explaining her plans for modifying the wheelchair, she saw hope beginning to grow in the parents' color patterns. Sometimes the greatest gift wasn't the solution itself, but the willingness to try something new. Jawa, the station's chief engineer, stared at the wheelchair with fascination. His hands moved over the simple mechanical device, his skin shifting through shades of green that indicated deep thought. "The basic principles are sound," he said, "but we'll need to make significant changes for Aetherian anatomy." For 2 weeks, Hanuel and Jawa worked together in the engineering bay. They widened the seat to accommodate Dawi's longer torso, adjusted the height of the backrest, and modified the wheels to work better with Aetherian arm structure. Jawa even added small anti-gravity units to make the chair lighter and easier to maneuver. The day they finished, Hanuel could barely contain her excitement as she calmed Dawi's family. When they arrived at the engineering bay, Dawi's skin flickered rapidly between colors at the sight of the modified wheelchair. "This is for me?" he asked, his translator barely keeping up with his excited tones. "Would you like to try it?" Hanuel asked, watching as his parents hovered nearby, their own skin showing a mix of worry and hope. Getting Dawi into the chair took time. His body was built differently from humans, and they had to figure out the best way for him to settle into the seat. Jawa made small adjustments on the spot, tweaking the supports until Dawi looked comfortable. "Now, these are the wheels," Hanuel explained, showing him how to grip the handrails. "You push them forward to move forward, and backward to move backward. To turn, you push one wheel while holding the other still." Dawi's first attempt sent him spinning in a circle, causing his skin to flash with surprised yellows and oranges. But he laughed, a sound that made his parents' colors brighten with joy. "Try again," Hanuel encouraged. "Put your hands here, like this." Slowly, carefully, Dawi began to get the hang of it. His movements became smoother as he learned to control the chair. Down the wide corridor he went, at first with Hanuel walking beside him, then on his own. The moment Dawi successfully rolled himself down the corridor without help, his skin blazed with brilliant colors of joy. Tears, which in Aetherians came out as small crystals, formed in his eyes. "I'm moving," he called out. "I'm moving by myself." His parents floated nearby, their own skin showing complex patterns of emotion. Minji reached out to touch her son's shoulder as he rolled past, her crystals falling freely now. Word spread quickly through the station about the human device that let a ground-bound child move freely. Other Aetherian children began appearing in the corridors to watch. At first, they kept their distance, hovering above and observing with curiosity. Then one brave young Aetherian named Hyung floated down and asked Dawi if he could try pushing the chair. Soon, others joined in. They took turns pushing Dawi around, turning it into a game. Their laughter echoed through the corridors as they discovered this new way of moving. "It's like flying, but different," one child exclaimed, their skin flashing excited patterns. Dawi taught them how to do safe spins, how to navigate corners, how to move at different speeds. The children who had once ignored him now sought him out, eager to learn about this strange Earth device. The adults watched this transformation with amazement. Jawa observed that the children were naturally adapting to include ground-based movement in their games, creating new ways to play that let everyone participate. "Look how they include him now," Tahoe said to Hanuel one day, his colors showing deep gratitude. "They don't see him as limited anymore. They see him as having a different, interesting way to move." Even the station's medical staff became interested. Dr. Yoon, the chief medical officer, requested detailed information about the wheelchair's design. "This could help others with similar conditions," she said, her skin showing professional interest. "We never considered ground-based mobility as a valid option before." As days passed, Doi grew stronger and more confident. He could now move quickly through the corridors, navigate tight turns, and even access parts of the station he'd never been able to reach before. His education center adapted one of their hovering desks to work with his wheelchair, and his attendance became regular instead of sporadic. But perhaps the most beautiful moment came when Doi showed his parents how he could now visit the upper-level gardens. Using the station's cargo lifts, he could reach places he'd only dreamed about before. The sight of him rolling through paths of exotic flowers, surrounded by other children, his skin glowing with happiness, made everything worthwhile. "You've given our son more than mobility," Minji told Haniel one evening. "You've given him community, connection, hope." Haniel watched as Doi rolled past, playing some complex game with his new friends that involved both floating and rolling. "Sometimes," she replied, "we just need to look at problems differently. Solutions often come from unexpected places." The wheelchair had become more than just a mobility device. It had become a bridge between two ways of moving, two ways of thinking, and most importantly, between people who might otherwise never have connected. The education center hummed with activity as Doi rolled through its entrance, his wheelchair's wheels making a soft sound against the polished floor. Teacher Yuna watched from her hovering platform as he joined his classmates, who now naturally made space for him in their circular arrangement. Just 2 months ago, Doi had been a quiet presence at the back of the room, often missing classes due to exhaustion from dragging himself through the station. Now he raised his hand to answer questions, his skin glowing with confidence as he shared his thoughts on their cosmic physics lessons. Doi's understanding of gravitational forces is quite remarkable, Yuna mentioned to Dr. Wujin during a routine observation, perhaps because he experiences gravity differently from other students. Dr. Wujin nodded, his skin showing patterns of deep interest as he watched Doi demonstrate a complex orbital concept using his wheelchair's movement as an example. The medical director had been spending more time in the education center lately, studying how the human mobility device had changed not just Doi's life, but the entire classroom dynamic. During break times, other students would gather around Doi's wheelchair, fascinated by its mechanics. They had created new games that combined hovering and rolling, making their play inclusive for everyone. The sound of their laughter echoed through the corridors, a melody of floating and wheeling joy. One morning, Dr. Wujin received an unexpected visitor in his medical bay. An adult Aetherian named Shunho appeared, unable to hover due to an accident that had damaged his gravity organ. "I saw the child with the wheeled chair," Junho said, his skin showing patterns of hope. "Could something similar help me?" This was how the mobility initiative began. Dr. Wujin and Jawa started working together, studying human mobility devices and adapting them for Aetherian use. They created different versions, some with anti-gravity assists, others purely mechanical, each designed for different needs. The station's corridors began to change. Ramps appeared alongside the usual open spaces. Texture strips, once only used for maintenance work, were expanded and improved. Signs appeared in both hovering and ground-level positions. Doi's teacher Yuna noticed other changes too. Students began doing projects about different ways of moving through space. They studied how various alien species handled mobility challenges. The classroom discussions became richer, more inclusive, as they considered multiple perspectives. One day, a group of young Aetherians presented a project about combining hovering and rolling technologies. Their prototype, though rough, showed how their thinking had evolved. They no longer saw ground-based movement as a limitation, but as another valid way of navigating space. Before Doi's wheelchair, one student explained, their skin glowing with excitement, "We thought everyone had to move the same way. Now we know there are many ways to explore our world." The changes spread beyond the education center. Dr. Wujin documented how the station's medical approach to physical differences was shifting. Instead of just accepting limitations, they began looking for alternatives, solutions, new possibilities. Station engineers started redesigning common areas to be more accessible. They installed lifting platforms that worked for both hovering and non-hovering individuals. The gardens, once difficult to navigate for ground-based movement, got smooth pathways that wound between the floating flower beds. Dawei's parents noticed their son growing not just more confident, but more involved in station life. He joined the Young Scientists Club, where his unique perspective on movement and gravity led to interesting discussions. His project about combining Earth and Aetherian technologies won first place in the station's science exhibition. Other families with children who had mobility challenges began reaching out. The sight of Dawei moving independently gave them hope. Dr. Wujin's office became busy with consultations, each case unique, each solution carefully adapted to individual needs. The station's governing council took notice. They established a committee to study accessibility, with Dawei's father Teo as one of its members. Their first action was to make mobility assistance a standard medical option, not just an experimental treatment. One afternoon, as Dawei practiced tricks with his wheelchair in the recreation area, Dr. Wujin observed something remarkable. A group of fully able hovering children were asking if they could try using wheeled devices, not because they needed them, but because they looked fun. Our understanding of disability was limited by our own assumptions, Dr. Wujin later wrote in his medical journal. Through a simple human device, we learned that difference is not deficiency. It is an opportunity to expand our vision of what's possible. The education center became a model for other stations. Yuma found herself hosting teachers from different space stations, showing them how an inclusive classroom could work. The sight of students hovering and rolling together, learning and playing as equals, inspired similar changes throughout Aetherian space. As Dawei rolled through the corridors each day, his wheelchair had become more than just a mobility aid. It was a symbol of change, a reminder that sometimes the best solutions come from looking beyond our own ways of doing things. His presence in the education center had taught everyone, students, teachers, and medical staff alike, that breaking barriers often started with simply seeing things differently. News of the wheelchair spread through the Aetherian communication networks like ripples in a pond. Messages began arriving at Station Centauri from other space stations, and even from the Aetherian homeworld. They all asked the same question. Could this Earth technology help their people too? The first visitor was Suin, an environmental engineer who had lost her ability to hover after an accident in the station's atmospheric processing plant. She arrived being carried by medical drones, her skin showing deep blues of sadness and shame. "I've been confined to my quarters for 3 cycles," she told Jawa and Haniel during their first meeting. "Our medical technology can't repair my gravity organ. I thought my career was over." Jawa's engineering team had already been working on new designs. They showed Suin their latest prototype, a wheelchair that combined Earth mechanics with Aetherian anti-gravity technology. It could switch between rolling and floating modes, allowing the user to navigate both ground-level and higher spaces. The moment Suin sat in the prototype, her skin blazed with colors of joy. She moved tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as she mastered the controls. "I can work again," she whispered, crystal tears forming in her eyes. "I can live again." Dawei often visited the engineering bay while they worked on new designs. He had become something of an expert, showing other Aetherians how to use their wheelchairs. His natural talent for teaching helped break down the initial fear and hesitation many felt about using ground-based mobility. "Remember," he would say, his skin glowing with encouraging patterns, "it's just another way to move. Not better or worse, just different." Tahoe and Minji, once hesitant about drawing attention to their son's condition, now spoke openly at community gatherings. They shared their journey from acceptance of limitations to embracing new possibilities. Their stories touched many hearts and changed many minds. "Our culture taught us that those who cannot hover must accept their fate," Tahoe said during one gathering. "But our son taught us that fate has many paths, and sometimes the path forward runs along the ground." The engineering team worked tirelessly to improve their designs. They created chairs for different needs, some with extra support for those with multiple challenges, others built for speed and maneuverability. Each design combined the best of both worlds: Earth's practical mechanics and Etherian anti-gravity technology. One breakthrough came when they developed a chair that could climb walls. Using modified gravity fields, it allowed users to access any part of the station's three-dimensional space. The first test run, with Doi at the controls, drew a crowd of amazed onlookers. The station became a center for what they called adaptive technology. Engineers and medical professionals from other stations came to learn, bringing their own ideas and experiences. Each visit led to new improvements, new possibilities. But perhaps the most significant change was in how Etherian society viewed physical differences. Children in the education center no longer stared when someone used a wheelchair. Instead, they were more likely to ask questions about the technology, eager to understand how things worked. Aniel watched all this with quiet satisfaction. Her simple idea had grown into something far bigger than she had imagined. The wheelchair had become a bridge between cultures, showing how different perspectives could lead to better solutions for everyone. One evening, as she watched Suyin leading a team meeting from her hover wheelchair, Hanuel noticed something remarkable. The other engineers weren't focusing on how Suyin moved. They were focused on her ideas, her expertise, her contributions. The wheelchair had become just another tool, like the data pads they all used. The station's success led to the establishment of an interspecies adaptive technology center. Engineers from Earth and other allied species began contributing ideas and technologies. What started as one wheelchair for one boy had grown into a movement that crossed cultural and species boundaries. Dawi's parents took on official roles as cultural liaisons, helping other families adjust to using adaptive technology. Their personal experience helped ease the fears and doubts of those facing similar challenges. "We're not just changing how people move," Minji told a group of visiting parents. "We're changing how we think about movement itself. Every path is valid, whether it goes up through the air or along the ground." As more Etherians adopted the new technology, the station's architecture began to change. New sections were built with both hovering and rolling access in mind. The distinction between normal and adaptive technology began to blur as everyone recognized the value of having multiple options for movement. The cultural exchange went both ways. Earth engineers learned from Etherian anti-gravity technology, developing new mobility solutions that could help humans with similar challenges. What began as a simple wheelchair had sparked an interstellar collaboration that benefited both species. And through it all, Dawi continued to roll through the station's corridors, his presence a living reminder that sometimes the best solutions come from looking beyond our own cultural assumptions to see new possibilities. On her last morning aboard Station Centauri, Hanuel stood by the same window where she had first arrived 1 year ago. The stars looked different now, not just distant lights but bridges between cultures, between ways of thinking and moving through space. Down the corridor, she heard the familiar sound of wheels and children's laughter. Dawi was leading his weekly mobility training session, something he had started 3 months ago. Through the clear walls, she could see him demonstrating a complicated maneuver to a group of young Etherians, some hovering, others in wheelchairs of various designs. His skin glowed with confidence as he spoke, showing none of the shyness that had once made him hide from others. The children watched attentively as he explained how to navigate the garden's new pathways, their skin patterns showing excitement and interest. Taiho approached Hanuel, hovering quietly beside her. "The Accessibility Initiative Committee met yesterday," he said, his skin showing proud patterns. "We're expanding the program to 3 more stations next month." As director of the initiative, Tahoe had transformed from a worried father into a powerful advocate for change. His office now received daily communications from across Etherian space, asking for advice on implementing similar programs. "Remember how worried we were about Doi using the wheelchair?" Tahoe asked, his skin showing thoughtful patterns. "Now I can't imagine our society without this technology. You've changed more than just my son's life." Hanuel. They watched as Doi led his group through the garden level, a place he once could only dream of visiting. The children moved in a beautiful dance of hovering and rolling, helping each other navigate the various paths and platforms. No one seemed to notice or care who was in a wheelchair and who was hovering. They were just children playing together. The station itself had transformed over the year. New ramps curved gracefully alongside floating platforms. Hybrid technology allowed seamless transitions between ground-based and anti-gravity movement. Signs and controls were positioned for easy access from any height or position. Dr. Woojin appeared, accompanied by visitors from another station. "Hanyul," he called out, his skin showing warm greeting patterns. "These engineers want to thank you. Their station has just completed its first accessibility upgrade." The visiting engineers shared images of their work, ramps and pathways similar to Station Centauri's, but with their own unique innovations. They had taken the basic idea and built upon it, creating new solutions for their specific needs. Minji joined them, her skin glowing with the colors of celebration. "We're having a gathering in the main hall," she announced. "Everyone wants to say goodbye." The main hall was filled with people, hovering, rolling, walking. Hanyul saw Shuyin demonstrating her latest hover wheelchair design to a group of fascinated engineers. Jiawei was deep in discussion with visiting technicians about new mobility solutions, but most touching was the sight of the children. They had organized a display of movement games, showing how hovering and rolling could work together in beautiful patterns. Doi led one group, his wheelchair moving in perfect sync with his hovering friends. "A year ago," Yuna said, approaching Hanyul, "these children didn't know how to play together. Now look at them. They're creating new games, new ways of moving, new ways of thinking." The station's governing council presented Hanyul with a crystal plaque, inscribed with words in both human and Etherian script, for showing us that different paths can lead to the same stars. As Hanyul prepared to board her transport back to Earth, Doi rolled up to her. His skin showed complex patterns of gratitude and friendship. "You taught me that being different isn't being less," he said. "Now I can teach others the same thing." They had arranged for Hanyul to receive regular updates about the accessibility initiative's progress. Already, 5 more stations had requested information about implementing similar programs. The movement was growing, spreading across Etherian space like stars lighting up the darkness. Standing in the transport bay, Hanyul looked one last time at the station she had called home for a year. What had started with one wheelchair, one act of kindness, had grown into something that would continue long after she was gone. The legacy wasn't just in the ramps and wheelchairs, or even in the initiative itself. It was in the children who now saw difference as normal, in the engineers who looked for new solutions instead of accepting limitations, in the society that was learning to embrace multiple ways of being. As her transport pulled away from Station Centauri, Hanyul watched through the window as Doi led another demonstration in the garden level. His wheelchair caught the starlight, gleaming like a beacon of change, a reminder that sometimes the smallest actions could light the way to the biggest transformations. The stars stretched out before her, endless possibilities in the darkness of space. She smiled, knowing that somewhere out there, wheels were rolling alongside hovering forms, creating new paths through the universe, one movement at a time.